When the deep state's propagandists posing as journalists and news anchors tell you that America is unique when it comes to violence and gun violence, and that banning guns would make America safer and would reduce violence, they're lying. And I know from personal experience. Stay tuned. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Behind the Deep State. I'm your host, Alex Newman. Thank you for joining us today. I have a little bit of a unique perspective on this gun issue. Of course, we just had some mass shootings. A transgender activist, woman confused about her gender, went in and slaughtered some young Christian children, some 9-year-old children, and, of course, some Christian teachers and school employees. And so the Democrats never one to allow a crisis to go to waste, jumped into high gear. We've got Joe Biden demanding an assault weapons ban. We've got leftist state governments plotting new restrictions on our right to keep and bear arms. And they're telling us over and over and over again that we have a violence problem, and that's because we have guns in America. Well, it's all a fraud. And I know, like I said, from personal experience. So I want to share with you, I don't know if you guys know, but I spent most of my life overseas. When I was 4, I moved to Mexico. And so we'll start with Mexico. Mexico is an interesting place. Gun ownership for civilians is basically banned. And it's unbelievably violent. In fact, it is one of the most violent nations in the world. Only criminals and government agents get guns, and sometimes I'm repeating myself when I say government agents. Their government is so unbelievably corrupt. Civilians cannot have firearms in Mexico, and it is one of the most violent nations in the world. Okay, they have a murder rate that is many times higher than the United States, orders of magnitude higher than the United States. One of the first things I noticed when I moved there, this was very strange to me as a little kid, why did everybody have to live behind a big giant wall? Why did everybody have electric fencing over the top of their wall? Why did everybody have broken glass and barbed wire? We didn't have anything like that in Florida. Why was it so ubiquitous in Mexico? And I remember Mom saying, Mexico is not as safe as Florida. Yeah, boy, you could say that again. Of course, I remember just being constantly attacked by police. We used to get pulled over on a regular basis. We'd have to pay the fine on the spot. They called it a mordida. Totally corrupt government, totally corrupt police force. One of my most vivid memories from childhood, we came home after a vacation in another part of Mexico, and our entire house had been burglarized. And so these criminals had robbed our house. They'd left knives all over the house. They broke in, they stole all our stuff. One of the things that was so interesting when we got home, my dad called the company lawyer and said, hey, our house was robbed. And I'll never forget this. The lawyer said, do not report it to the police. Don't call the police, because what'll happen then if you call the police is they'll show up, they'll take inventory, see what else is left to steal, and then that stuff will get stolen as well. So, actually, Dad, who's passed away now, so I feel like I can say this, but he actually went out and bought an illegal firearm. He determined that protecting his family was going to be more important than obeying ridiculous laws in Mexico. So got a big metal gate made. He bought an illegal firearm, and he said, we're going to protect our family rather than obey these silly laws. So that was good. It was a powerful lesson for me. But really, the takeaway for me from Mexico is that it's not the guns, right? Guns are, again, totally banned in Mexico. Civilians can't have them. And yet all the criminals have guns, right? They shoot each other in the street. They leave dead bodies hanging from bridges without heads, right? And if gun bans actually worked, you'd say, well, Mexico should be one of the safest places in the world, right? And yet it's not. It is one of the most violent places in the world. Cartels basically control the government. They shoot each other in the street. After Mexico, we moved to Brazil. Same type of situation there. Super, super strict gun control. And yet, when I lived in Sao Paulo, it was one of the murder capitals of the world. There's something like 80 murders every night in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Why? Because criminals don't obey gun laws, right? And it was the same thing in Mexico. As in Mexico, everybody had to live behind armed guards and big walls and electric fencing and all the rest of it. What was really interesting, when Jair Bolsonaro came into office, the last president, he actually liberalized gun laws. And according to the Wall Street Journal, homicide levels decreased by more than a third since they made guns more accessible to civilians. So there you go, folks. They're lying about guns making countries or cities or any other place dangerous, right? Here were nations where guns were very, very difficult, if not impossible, to acquire legally, and yet all the criminals had guns and murder was out of control. Compare that to Switzerland. After Brazil Brazil, we moved to Switzerland. And Switzerland is a really interesting country. It could not have been more different from Mexico and Brazil and the other gun-controlled nations of Latin America. In fact, it was almost the antithesis, right? There was virtually no crime, one of the lowest murder rates, if not the lowest murder rate in the world. And yet gun ownership is mandatory, right? If you're a man, when you turn 18, the government gives you a fully automatic machine gun, which of course you cannot acquire in the United States without jumping through a bunch of hoops like a trained circus animal, without giving the ATF a bunch of money and applying for special permits, giving them your fingerprints and all kinds of stuff. In Switzerland, it is mandatory to have such a gun. You must keep it at your house. You must know how to use it. You must have ammunition. And you could go into any Swiss home and there'd be, machine guns sitting in the closet or above the kitchen cupboard. And yet there was no crime and there was no murder. What in the world? Right? How does it make sense then? Right? And so even after you're done with your militia service, which is around age 34 in Switzerland, the men had the option to buy the gun from the government, and many did. In fact, most probably did. So there are millions and millions and millions of fully automatic machine guns floating around Switzerland. And it was totally normal. You could get on the train and you'd see a guy with a machine gun slung over his back. You'd go out for a walk. There'd be guys coming home from military practice with their machine guns. On weekends, you'd see little kids with a rifle slung over their back on their way to the shooting range for a shooting festival. And that was just normal, right? It was just part of the culture. Guns were absolutely ubiquitous, right? Swiss culture is inextricably intertwined with gun rights, with this militia culture where everybody has firearms at home. Totally normal, right? In America, if you would see, a guy get on the train with a fully automatic machine gun slung over his back, if you would see a guy in the grocery store shopping with a fully automatic machine gun slung over his back, you'd have a SWAT team there in 5 minutes, right? You'd have people shrieking and calling 911 and Karens and liberals, oh, wow, gun! And yet, it didn't happen in Switzerland. And so, how can it be that the nation where guns are mandatory, where guns are absolutely ubiquitous, where virtually every home's got a fully automatic machine gun in the closet, is this oasis of peace and stability, right? Nobody's invaded Switzerland in hundreds of years. They didn't even participate in World War I or World War II. Hitler understood that invading Switzerland would be suicide. Because the Swiss, of course, were all heavily armed back then as well. How can it be, then, that one of the most peaceful and crime-free places in the world, guns are totally ubiquitous, and the most violent nations on Earth, and, you could add other, I just use the nations that I have experience with, but there's plenty of other nations that could serve as examples. You go to Venezuela, right? Venezuela, also with the help from the United Nations about a decade ago, disarmed all the law-abiding gun owners. What happened? Murder rates went through the roof. Crime rates went through the roof. It is basically a dystopia. And so, folks, when these deep state propagandists on the TV tell you that if we just take away guns from law-abiding citizens, we're going to stop crime, you need to recognize you're being deceived. And I could give you, stats and philosophical arguments, but I just thought today we'd do something a little bit different. I'd just share with you a personal experience, okay? Having grown up in countries where people are disarmed, I can tell you it's very, very dangerous. The government is out of control and the criminals are out of control. Having spent 4 years in a country where everybody has guns, where people are required to have guns, I can tell you there's almost no crime, and the government is one of the freest in the world. In many respects, Switzerland today is freer than the United States of America. And so, folks, there is a correlation between guns and a lot of things. Right? Free people have guns, slaves do not. And if you think guns are going to help you have a safe society, you should ask how that worked out for the Germans, how that worked out for the Soviets, how that worked out for the Chinese, how that worked out for the Cubans, how that worked out for the Venezuelans, right? It always ends the same way. Absolute disaster. So that's all we have for today, folks. I want to thank you for tuning in to another episode of Behind the Deep State. I'm your host, Alex Newman, senior editor at The New American Magazine. Go to thenewamerican.com, sign up, and get at least the daily headlines for free. Also, the print magazine. You should subscribe if you're not a subscriber yet. It is the best source of intelligence on the deep state that exists in the world today. Thanks again. Till next time, God bless you all.
Imprisonment, forced labor, permanent separation from my family. Perhaps death. I knew what could happen to people who were caught trying to defect. But the watchtowers stood yards away. The possibility of a new life in a different world, one without tyranny, was within sight. The West. I thought of the rewards no longer crushed under the boot of communism. I would work and make money, no longer restrained by the chains of collectivism. I would say what I wanted, without fear of spies and informants nearby. I would be free. The frozen rain and Romanian mud seeped through my gloves and cloths. I fantasized about the fire burning in the wood stove of my parents' home, but I pushed those thoughts from my mind, closed my eyes, and waited for the cover of the darkness.
Get Defector, a true story of tyranny, liberty, and purpose by Mark Hobafkovich with Paul Dragu. A thrilling page-turner that will remind you how precious yet vulnerable freedom is. Available at shopjbs.org or Amazon. For a limited time, get 20% off your entire order using promo code Defector20 when you purchase Defector at shopjbs.org.